Some of the biggest scientific breakthroughs happen by accident. X-rays, penicillin, Newton's whole thing with the apple and whatnot. Mine started as a bit of a personal tragedy. You know, my dad was very kind and generally a good father. He was a renowned aerospace engineer at Bohr Explorations, the enterprise responsible for the first manned missions to the Jupiter moons. So naturally I looked up to him and quickly became fascinated with everything space-related. However, at some point in time, he adopted a somewhat pessimistic view on the world. When he told me that we'll never leave our solar system, my little space bubble burst like the Challenger back in 1986. And to be fair, he did have good arguments. Most things involving astronomical distances just weren't efficient, and while we did colonize large parts of our solar system during his lifetime, everything beyond that just didn't seem feasible. Eventually, I buried my ambitions to follow in his footsteps and decided on a more grounded field of study in material science. Right after my graduation, I was lucky enough to get a position at the Ganymede MRC 2.14. A dream come true. Well, for my father at least. You know, back then, Ganymede was well known to house the pioneers of AI-driven engineering, solid-state physics, and nanomaterial science, and I was to become one of them. Except that I wasn't half as clever, and neither as motivated as my peers. I somehow managed to get my degree by picking the easiest courses, sticking to the right people, and cheating where applicable. And now all of my research efforts ultimately came to nothing, while I slowly but steadily ran out of ideas. Well, back then, I really grew desperate. Which is a lot easier to admit now, considering how it all turned out for me. I didn't really produce any meaningful output in weeks, if not months, and barely got through by pretending to work on something big and important. In truth, I merely locked myself in one of our less popular labs, pitted my career choices over a few cheap rehyred beers, and hooked one of our older Skane atomic layer factories onto a randomizer, just to have at least some useless fake samples in hand, once my failure inevitably came to the surface. I was on the way back from the restrooms when the alarm started to ring on that fateful day. Within seconds, the hallways filled with people. Due to the strategic value of our facility to the USEC, we staff members were well prepared for any kind of altercation, from terrorist attacks to orbital bombardment. There was a protocol for everything, and drills were so frequent that nothing would really surprise anyone. I, however, was a tiny bit surprised when the security personnel came to get me from the bunkers and apprehend me for sabotage and alleged treason. Ironically, I sat in a 5 square meter cell, counting the freckles on my arm, when the discoveries were made that led to me receiving my Nobel Prize just 2 years later. In hindsight, I should have known by the way they apologized when they guided me from my cell to the security control room. My status had just been updated from traitor to treasure. The security footage from my lab was as bizarre as it was fascinating. From one second to the other, and without a sound noticeable by the cameras, the smallish room, filled with barely more than a desk, some shelves and the old scarf in the center, went pitch black. Surely a camera malfunction, one would think. Until a few seconds later, the dark started to fade to light again, an ominous fog slowly sinking to the bottom of the room, leaving its black residue in every nook and cranny of the furniture and machinery. The air ventilation safety sensors later confirmed what I knew from the moment I saw what was missing from the room. That black fog was once my sample, split into individual atoms and scattered evenly throughout the room. More importantly, scattered by a force yet unknown to mankind. The next few weeks went by in a blur. Under constant surveillance, I managed to extract the last parameters from the old scarf. Careful not to reveal that they were not chosen by my superior intellect, but by almost complete happenstance. A day later, the same blueprint crashed a second scarf unit of identical model. 3 days later, I was provided with my own team of research assistants and moved into a brand new top-notch lab in a Ganymede MCR 4.1, which at least officially was still under construction. Another 11 days passed, and we had replicated the incident on 24 different types of atomic layer factories, covering most of the shiny white labs in a thick layer of black dust. Before I knew it, I became the research director of a whole new branch of our organization. Somewhere around that point, someone in a meeting room several 100,000 miles away started to call our discovery the Zimmermann sample. Fares better on a presentation slide than random atom composition 1452b, I guess. But well, the name stuck, and so my moniker was irrevocably engraved into the history books. In time, my team identified the exact threshold when the sample would explode, up to a single atom. No matter how we approached this state, the results were always the same. Like there was some fundamental principle of the universe prohibiting us from creating just this one particular formation of atoms. Well, actually not just this one kind, as it turned out. As time passed, human sciences reached more and more boundaries that shouldn't exist. Most of them a lot more subtle than what we witnessed on Ganymede. We found displacements in crystal lattices as minuscule as inexplicable. Algorithms that reliably corrupt file systems on compile. That one carbon-carbon bond that just won't form, no matter how favourable the conditions. Locked angles between certain molecules that even our most detailed simulations couldn't reproduce. Minor deviations in particle interactions that defy anything we thought we knew about conservation of energy and momentum. The list grew longer with each passing year. Of course, being humanity, we made a sport of it. In the decades following the incident on Ganymede, hunting those edges, as we started to call them, was seen as the pinnacle of each scientific discipline. Finding a new edge was a surefire way to a Nobel Prize. Discovering a whole new category of edges, however, was the real jackpot, securing unfathomable amounts of publicity and personal fame, as well as a lifetime supply of research funds and postgrad students. The hype didn't last forever though. While certainly curious, the hunt for edges rarely brought results that were productive in any way. On the contrary, the discovery of an edge might prove rather destructive, bringing whole branches of research to a halt. Society adapted and shifted its focus again. We accepted that there was a barrier that we most likely never would break, and that we remained confined to our own little bubble in space. More traditional fields of engineering, socioeconomics, applied neurosciences, and psychology, they became the new stars. We learned to be very sophisticated at everything we did. Only a few fundamental researchers continued to futilely push the boundaries. Mostly old farts like me, either too stubborn or too limited in their qualifications for the more refined and integrated arts of new. It took another stupidly random happenstance to shake things up, and, as history wills it, I was in the centre of it again. The second to last batch of grad students I mentored before my not-so-well-deserved retirement were about to finish their degrees. Jokers as they were, they wanted to honour my scientific career by reenacting the discovery of the Zimmermann sample. Since those ancient scarf units were hard to come by, they got the idea to use a self-rearrangement type of edge we studied earlier that year to replicate the effect. When a few hours later the whole campus was covered in the fine black dust I knew so well, I had what I call the only flash of genius of my life. In a matter of milliseconds I realised the potential. I finally discovered the edges for what they were. Not some heavenly restriction placed upon us by the divine, but a brand new toolbox that we've been slowly building up the whole time, while utterly dismissing its possibilities, up until now. A new spark ignited at this moment, both in me and in the history of fundamental sciences in general. Sure enough, by the time we had amassed a waste fundus of edges of all kinds, within it we found some that seemed compatible, downright made for each other, and gasped at the opportunities that now lay in front of us. The redevelopment and reorganization of sciences took on an incredible pace. Decades of seemingly wasted research efforts finally came to fruition all at once, and scientific breakthroughs popped up wherever we went. Clever arrangements of instability-type edges allow for the harvest of seemingly limitless amount of energy for our engines from the still unknown universal force that drove them. Mass-produced prohibition-type edge alloys provided new forms of shielding for our ships and space stations that were several orders of magnitude stronger than what we had previously managed to build. Creative combinations of compatibility-type edges advanced medical sciences and bioengineering by dozens of years at once, readying our fragile bodies for prolonged ventures into space. Each discovery enabled our long-refined conventional machinery to surpass its innate limits. And before we knew it, humanity had entered a new golden age of technology, and nothing seemed outside of our reach anymore, not even the stars. It's actually funny, in hindsight. Just as I tricked everyone into believing I was a genius when a simple randomized computer script did all the work, I also kind of tricked myself into becoming the pioneer of space travel the young me had wished to be. And with that, we, as humanity, tricked the universe into granting us access to the beyond that it so desperately tried to deny us. Something, or someone, has forced a set of rules and exceptions upon us that we might never fully understand. Arbitrary, debilitating, and cruel. But we refused to abide by them. I guess sometimes it pays off to be cheating.